Let's pod, people. So, Sarah, you've
What's
seen
that?
some episodes, which is really A, more than most of our guests, and B, more than Will. So
Nice.
we appreciate that.
Welcome to an all-new episode of Work in Progress with John Lane and Will Barfield. This podcast explores leadership traits under stress with a special guest each week. We use a simple and accurate OAD assessment to identify key personality traits or superpowers, as well as the shadow side, kryptonite traits that appear when we're under stress. As always, we'll have some pod banter, shameless plugging, and we'll even let our guests talk for a bit. Of course, no humble brags. Welcome to the show.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Work in Progress podcast with John Lane and Will Barfield. Nice to see you, Will. How's your week?
Oh, always nice to see you, sir.
Oh,
it's going well. It just got better at this moment.
I agree. We have a high energy guest on today. Hi, Sarah.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
We are thrilled. Banter time. Will, I'm going to say two names to you, and you're going to have to tell a story. You ready?
No pressure.
Vinny Jimmy.
Oh, yeah, Vinny Jimmy.
That's
You may
from
tell the story now.
4 episodes ago. Yeah. How did it work out?
Vinny Jimmy story, Sarah, is that I was one of my kryptonites is I can be driving and get going a little bit too fast, and I had a boo-boo where a candidate that I was communicating with and trying to set up an interview, on my calendar invite, I put Jimmy, and his name was Vinny. And my wife, who is the yin to my yang, she caught the error and helped me fix it. But it went okay. Good candidate, and he ended up being a very reasonable and flexible fella. So
good. And he wasn't too offended. Is his name really Vinny, or is it really Jimmy?
It's Vinny.
Vinny.
It's Vinny, and I just like Jimmy at that moment for some reason.
Jimmy's a nice name.
They're both good.
Yeah.
They're similar-ish.
They are.
They're close enough. Well, good.
Consonants.
In show business, we refer to that as a callback.
Oh.
So we called back to a few episodes.
I like that.
Yeah, it's good. Purple shirt. Interesting choice on a purple background.
You want to know why?
Yes.
So my wife and I are going to see Six.
We saw that last weekend. It is so amazing.
So I wore purple because it's regal.
It is.
And so I'm themed for this evening.
You're ready to go.
Yeah, I will make a note of that I can't wear purple anymore because of the background. It's like I have some green shirts that I want to wear, but you remember the Doug Kaufman episode? I was ghosty.
You're invisible.
Yeah, but just my head
green screen.
Yeah, so purple's out, but I was feeling regal. So I did this because we're going to go see Six tonight. She's very excited about it, and I'm very excited about her.
Is Annabelle going, or just you and Amy?
Just us. Now, Annabella will be here with her favorite person, Blythe. Blythe has been her sitter for many years. She's in her early 20s, and she likes Blythe more than us, so she's thrilled that we're leaving.
That is great. It was a Girl Scream festival when we saw it.
Okay.
Maybe some earplugs.
Yeah. Okay. More information. Hey, guess who we have on the show? Oh, wait. See, I'm all screwed up now.
You are.
Anyway, we only do one take here, but I'm John Lane.
And I'm Will Barfield.
And we are a work in progress. Clearly, today we are. Let us introduce not our sixth, our first, Sarah. How are you, Sarah?
Hello. I'm doing so well. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Tell our whipsters, I always step on that, our whipsters, a little bit about yourself.
Yes. So I am an HR through and through. Born and raised in Raleigh, North Carolina. Funny enough, Will and I met, I don't know how many years now, when I started at Vaco as a recruiter. So I have a very similar background as Will, and quickly moved into the HR space. And so now I work more strategically, more functionally, more in that people space, more within the coaching and leadership space with an Australian-based tech firm. that is also has a Raleigh presence. So that's a little bit about me.
And you're the head of people for the U.S. for them, right?
Yes. Yep. So I'm the people and culture manager here in the U.S. And my HR team is a team of 4. So everybody else sits in Australia. So I'm the Lone Ranger over here.
You can do whatever the hell you want.
Yeah. What's the head count at now for your company in the U.S. at this point?
We have about 100, or in the U.S. we have about 30 individuals. Company-wide, we have about 130. So Sydney is our headquarters. That's kind of where we were built from. And then we expanded into the U.S., I believe, in 2016, 2017.
Very good. Well, awesome to have you on. And now we're going to break you down like we always do.
Yes.
Please.
Okay. So, wait, going too quick. All right. So we repeat every week that we discuss leadership traits under stress on this pod. And where we get our leadership traits under stress data is using the OAD assessment. It's fast, it's easy, it's accurate. It gives us strengths and weaknesses. We've cleverly converted them to a patented process to refer to them as superpowers and kryptonite.
Mm-hmm.
And here we go. So every week we start out by talking about the OAD. Where's my mouse? My pointer. The leadership style matrix, which is a classic business 2x2 4-quadrant breakout. And 13 typical traits are spread across all 4 quadrants. The way to read this is something like this. I am a socially oriented generalist in the builder quadrant, and I'm a negotiator. Will, Hank, is a technical. Did the train just go by?
Yeah, can you hear it?
It'll be here in a minute. I'm 2 blocks from you.
Yeah, it must be just I can hear the honking.
Will is a technically oriented generalist in the architect block quadrant, and he is a developer.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, as you know, you are a socially oriented generalist in the builder matrix, but you are an influencer, which is a sort of an interesting profile for somebody. I heard what you called yourself, people and culture. Influencing people towards behaviors and culture is interesting. We have seen a lot of our HR friends are more on this technical side because of all the guidelines and the regs and all of that stuff. But not our Sarah. She's in the upper right.
Higher on the other side, let's be honest.
Yeah. Will, do your thing.
Oh, sure. Sarah,
yes.
You've accomplished a lot in your career so far. How does it feel, though, to have that broken down and, compressed into a 2-dimensional table, everything you've accomplished?
I've seen it done different ways, but I actually really like it. It really felt relevant. Sometimes when you're going through a personality test, you're like, okay, are they just kind of guessing? How do they really know? But when I debriefed with John, it was very accurate. I felt, although, okay, maybe some HR people are more technical, I've never felt technical. I've always felt general and more on that coaching side. So to see that put in front of me and have it make sense in that way, I was like, sign me up.
That was cool. Well, I remember I asked you something like, do you have to do things like write the employee handbook? And you went like this.
Yeah, I was like,
You were like, no, I'm not doing that. We'll get it written. We'll get it
Delegate.
Written, but I'm not writing.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's break down for our listeners how this works. And so everyone who takes an assessment gets the results in this box. Obviously, not these orders. And we look at assertiveness, extroversion, patience, and detail orientation. These are called relative traits, meaning that where they fall on the graph is not as important as where they are in relationship to each other. So the first one we look at is the relationship between A, assertiveness, and D, detail orientation. When A is to the right of D, you're a generalist. Then we look at E versus D, and when E is greater than D, you're socially oriented, If it's the opposite, you're technically oriented. And then just a little inside baseball. The difference is the number of these little centiles in between tells us something about the intensity of the thing. So you are a generalist by one centile here. You are a socially oriented person by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we would say things like you are very outgoing, you are very optimistic, you are very open. We'd say things like on this one that you are somewhat venturesome, somewhat comfortable with risk, somewhat comfortable with ambiguity. And then we have a little bit of fun with looking at the relationship between P and A. So when P is to the left of A, that's somebody who is comfortable with change and operates at a level of urgency. And if P is to the right of A, then it's the opposite of that. So you are a socially oriented generalist influencer. The influencer comes because the D hooks back. We like to say, if it's important, you'll be on top of if it's important to you, however that's defined, you'll be on top of the detailed and structured about that. If it's not, you're going to be okay to delegate that away. And that's fine with you. So anyway, so all of that leads us up to the generic builder influencer superpowers and then kryptonites. Will.
Yes, thank you,
Do your
John. Beautiful
thing.
setup. Yes.
Where did I go? Oh, here I am.
We came back. I thought it was just going to be me and you, Sarah, for a moment there. As John stated, you have landed in the upper right quadrant where builder influencer profile. These are the generic traits that are going to be assigned to anyone who lands in that block with this readout. Of those there, which one speaks to you the most, as in, well, I recognize that in myself, or I've heard that from others? Is there a bullet there that really screams at you?
Yeah, I think there's a couple, but really the first one, persuasive, is always something that I've been told and something that I feel drives a lot of my impact from a business perspective as well. And maybe what puts me more on that social scale from an HR perspective versus the detail and the technical side.
Yeah.
I've never loved detail because I've never been good at it. And who likes things that they're not good at?
Right.
And so I think my relationships really, really are a big piece of that persuasiveness, right? I think there's a big difference when I initially read persuasive. It's like, oh, is she able to manipulate, or, how does that come to life? But I think a lot of it really is in my relationships and my ability to coach people through things that are really potentially tough for them or are blockers for them from a business perspective and a leadership perspective. And I think that's not only something that I feel like I'm good at, but it drives me. I love it. And so I would really say that's a big one for me.
That's an IE, yeah.
Before we leave this segment of the slide, John, I do want to point one thing out. Sarah and I have a history professionally, and she was part of a volunteer organization along with my wife.
Yes.
And I will say this you were talking about that hook back D.
Yeah.
And she did a marvelous job with very detail oriented execution work on some of these volunteer events because she really cared about the experience of the organization and the volunteers and the fundraising that was going on. So to your point there, for someone who doesn't love detail, that hook back tells us that, when she cares really deeply about it, that she can be excellent with the details. It's selective.
Well, thank you. Yes. I mean, it was not easy, but I would also maybe say that's part of the D, the driving, right? It's not easy, but I'm a driver. So although I'm not good at details, if I'm passionate about something like, our nonprofit that I sat on the board of, I was going to do it. I was going to get it done. And
going to get it done. Yep. Yeah. Yep.
So kryptonite, again, generic, but probably one of these maybe speaks to you, or others have pointed out when you're dealing with difficult, stressful, challenging situations? Where do you think we recognize that we fall down?
Man, I fall down on bullet point number 3. I always have my entire life. I really am a people pleaser. I really enjoy those strong relationships. And when a relationship doesn't feel strong, I tend to lean towards people pleasing, just as a natural tendency, when maybe the relationship needs some tougher coaching or some honesty, or some feedback. And so at my time at RESD, which is where I'm at right now, that's really the bulk of my position is a coaching position. And so I've learned very quickly how to, provide feedback while strengthening a relationship and being okay with, not just giving people what they want to hear, but giving people what I know they need to hear. And ultimately that strengthens a relationship. So that has served me, that lesson that I've learned at RESD, just with the nature of my role and the people that I, get to be so honored to work with, that definitely is something that hits me and hits me hard. But I've learned a lot over my time at
recognize it. Recognizing it is, and that's that super high E that you have. It is a driver towards relationships and engaging with people, but it can leave you stranded out there sometimes because you get too far over it. We look for that when we help interview salespeople. High E can be good in some ways, but if it's too high, you find the seller can almost be too empathetic towards like their prospects and like, oh, I didn't send the contract because so-and-so's kid's at the dentist and that kind of stuff. And it's empathetic and it's understandable, but it can actually work against what you're trying to accomplish. So it's
yeah. And I would say the same with HR, right? Or within my role as a people and culture manager, my job at the end of the day is to support our business, right? And so
That's
how
right.
do you balance, the question really becomes, how do you balance being an advocate for your people and giving them what they need while also balancing what does the business need, right? So maybe the business needs feedback, but you're nervous about your relationship, right? And so
yes,
it's a huge piece of really being successful in a role like mine is exactly what you said, not overly empathetic, realizing, having that balance between the business side as well as that people side is really big.
beautiful.
Sarah, you saw the readout for your strengths / superpowers, and you had some communication with us, with John pre-show. You made some notes on, what your own comments were on your strengths / superpowers, and, either what you feel are great gifts that you have or others have pointed out to you, prior leaders or peers, where you really, bring some skills to the table. Talk us through these bullets, why you wrote what you wrote, and I may jump in with a question or two before we leave this page.
Totally. When I was reading my superpowers, like I said earlier, they totally felt like they rang true along with my kryptonites. You can't have superpowers without kryptonites, that's for sure. And so I wrote these really, based off of my own experience, but also feedback that I've received over the years, not just in my career, but in my personal relationships growing up. And so really important for me to be able to kind of break these down and feel like they resonate. So, I, as part of a leadership coach, as a people and culture manager, while things like benefits administration, I certainly do, or, kind of managing the office, the physical office, or things like that. The depth of my role really is in creating a high success rate for the business, which means a high success rate for people around me, right? So how do I get them along the journey? How do I, instill our values, our mission? How do I continue to communicate, coach them out of tough times, while also knowing that it's okay for me to not know everything, right? That's a big piece of my journey is I'm not formally trained. I haven't gone through a big HR certification. I've only worked at small companies where maybe it's only been me. At my last job, I ran the whole HR department ultimately through COVID. And I did a lot of Googling. I talked to a lot of people in my network to make sure that we were doing the right things. And that's really kind of how I've learned. And so for me, knowing that it's okay to not know everything has been a huge part of my journey.
Cool.
So, yeah. With a lot of my journey too, within my career, is resilience is really big. I think everybody can probably say that, especially in the tech world, going through COVID. And then recently, I think it's no surprise that people are doing layoffs and having that resilience, and things are changing and the market is volatile. And how do we navigate that and navigate change through leadership? How do we create security for our people when it might not be secure? And a lot of that for me is my relationships. Trust and having that initially before going through that change is going to be what carries people through the change. And that has been, I'm going to say change again, but that's been life-changing for myself to create resilience within my own experience too, or those strong relationships.
Got it.
Task delegator, like you said earlier, John and Will, I am really good at handing things off that I don't feel passionate about, or that I don't feel like I'm good at, and somebody else is really good at. There is an individual on my team that is so detail-oriented, asks all the right questions, is totally data-driven, and I could not be the opposite. So why would I do something that I'm not good at, knowing, and that I don't enjoy, knowing that, there are other people around me that are going to be better than me at things, and they're going to like doing those things. So
Smart.
Yeah, a big key of empowering others is understanding what they enjoy and not holding things back from them, because why would you do that? And then I'm always curious. Like I said, most of my career has just been Googling if something was okay to do, or, Googling a framework or a theory or best practices somewhere else. And so I'm always curious about how other people are doing things, how I'm doing those. Is it right? Is it wrong? Are we not really sure if it's right or wrong? Because sometimes you don't know if it's right or wrong. So those are kind of my thoughts.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I have a question for her, John, before we move on to the kryptonite, which I know she'll be really revealing with those. Sarah mentioned I've known her since she was a recruiter, and I remember her telling me when she was in recruiting that recruiting was not her path.
Nope.
Recruiting was the door opener to human resources, but the human resources is really the path. And her superpower, that extroversion, that outgoing personality, not necessarily part and parcel to most HR professionals. A lot of your HR professionals are more back office, they're more behind the scenes, they're more detail, they're more process. And Sarah is not that. She's the inverse.
Yeah.
So my question to you, Sarah, is, long term for you career wise, I'm assuming we're heading down like a chief of people path, right? We want to be that people leader, and you can win with extroversion, and you can win with Googling and solving the problems, and you can certainly in the small company setting, figure some things out on the fly. But do you plan, as you continue to ascend, to complement some of that natural extroversion skill, outgoing and willingness to wing it, with some of the actual professional continuing education, cert gathering, and that kind of stuff, to try and stack up that profile so it gets really muscular from a people leader standpoint?
Absolutely. I think, from day one of what I can remember is leadership was really natural and really exciting to me. And so, the only way to, quote unquote, climb the ladder is to continue to grow and gain your skills and learn from those around you, and hire people on your team that are better than you. Right. And so you're going to learn from people in all directions, that 360-degree feedback from people below you, next to you, above you, diagonal to you. And so that, along with continuing education and networking and all of that, are huge key components for me to grow my career and create, that robust profile to ultimately allow me to continue to grow.
Yeah.
And Sarah, just so you know, Will and I are giving a continuing education class at RM Sherm in 2 weeks' time. So I think he was buttering you up to make sure you're attending.
Was I?
Always pitching.
Possibly.
You always pitching. I love
I
Possibly.
don't know who you're talking to.
I know you. Don't even try.
Okay, kryptonite. So things get challenging. COVID happens. You don't know the answer to a question. Run into a tough spot with, someone who's downline from you or someone you report to.
Mhm.
When the heat is on, things are hard. You're kryptonite. Why did you pen down these notes for us?
Yeah, I think especially going through COVID, there was so much detail that you had to really be on top of the ever-changing rules and laws and do's and don'ts and the safety measures, and all of that really taught me that it's very crucial to be able to, tap into those details and not miss those steps. But I've also learned that I'm not good at them. I have to work really, really hard, extra hard, to nail them down, to be more analytical and more data oriented, not to negate that doesn't, provide any value, because I do believe that there isn't a lot of data in HR that we can leverage from a business perspective. It just doesn't come natural to me. And so I need to make sure that I am really paying attention to that side of things and not just leaning towards my comfort level, right? Of having conversations and challenging others and, creating strategic frameworks. It's like, okay, don't forget, there's also a level of detail and data versus just going with my gut and hoping it's right. Sometimes that's okay. But there are situations where you should probably check if that's compliant or not. Who knows? Maybe not, but sometimes there is.
Seems like a good idea.
And then I think I touched on the people pleaser side a little bit earlier, but man, that is like really, you could put that, that could be my middle name. And so I, really have to make sure that I'm not just giving people what they want, but that I actually believe in what I'm giving them, right? So that could be a business proposal, or it could be a piece of feedback and that I don't want to give because I don't want to upset them. I don't want to hurt our relationship. So I don't know, you guys might be aware of Radical Candor, that framework by Scott. And I am ruinous empathy all day, every day. And so I have to make sure that I step more into the Radical Candor piece quite frequently. But yeah, that's kind of why I chose those ones.
Well, people pleasing, we see this so often in this upper right.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many shows we've done, John, where that was one of, if not the lead kryptonite or weakness that people kind of, reached for. It feels good to say yes.
Say yes. Saying yes too much. Yeah.
And you're empathetic. You don't want to damage relationships. You have a tendency, Sarah, to procrastinate delivering bad news.
Yep.
And figuring out how can I shape or shade or shift this so maybe it doesn't come across as bad as it is, or kind of let them off the hook a little easier.
Yeah.
And as you move into higher level roles and become, maybe responsible for all of the U.S. for a software company for human resources, you've got to be able to catch yourself making those mistakes. You recognize that, but whether you recognize it or not, I'm sure that you still struggle with that piece. And, hopefully it's not been a situation where it's created something that you couldn't go back and fix where you are.
Yeah, especially in my role now, the business that I'm a part of and the people that are here, not just from a support level, my boss and our executive team, as well as just the people around me, they are so great that it really is, and they're eager to learn, they're eager to support me, and so I haven't found myself in a spot where it's been kind of too far gone, and so RESD really has given me the opportunity to recognize that that's hard for me, and while simultaneously putting me in a position that I need to do it. Right. And in an environment that it's safe to do that and it's safe to practice that, because that's really important to RESD, that culture of feedback. And that's not always the case at businesses, right? There's retaliation or, people get upset, and here people want to know. And so it allows me to really explore that part that is a little bit more challenging for me naturally.
Real quick before we leave here, well, John, I've worked with RESD and with Annie.
Yes.
Before you arrived.
Yes.
And this is a cultural question, a leadership style cultural question. You've worked for U.S. based companies and reported up to U.S. based leadership, and you work for RESD now, reporting overseas to Australian leadership. I know that RESD as a company is very people first and culture conscious, but is it a big difference in your work history reporting to U.S. leadership as compared to Australian leadership and flexibility or what they will and won't embrace?
It's a great question. And I think for a person like me, it's a really important question. It's really important for me to be in a spot that values the social side of HR and the progressive side of HR, the coaching side, because that's where I fit. Right. And that's where I'm challenged, and that's where I want to be. And so I don't know if I would say it's culturally different between the US and Australia, but it's certainly different between past companies or other companies that some of my friends work for, and RESD, right? And so it's really, really, fit is huge. If you're an influencer like myself, or sit up in that top right corner, fitting in somewhere and feeling heard is really, really important, because it's more of a progressive line of work. And I could not be happier with the direction, with the leadership, with every decision. Work is always going to be hard. It's always going to be tough. But if you really are aligned from a foundation perspective, it's the best 40 plus hours a week.
That's great.
Click that button, John. So, Sarah, you commented on the accuracy of the tool and the readout, and probably saw some things that you already knew and recognized or had heard from others. Maybe learned some things that were a little bit new, and certainly you've probably gathered some information in this run up to the pod and then in this discussion with us today, reflecting on your superpowers and kryptonite. What did you gather in this experience that you can apply, right now, near term, and then as you kind of look across the career, these strengths and weaknesses that we've analyzed today, leadership lessons apply? What can you do with this data?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the biggest pieces that I can take away with it is just simply some of those bullet points, right? We go through life, and I've always known I don't like data, or I'm not good at detail, or that I have an ability to have strong relationships. But being able to lay that out is such a great reminder to say, okay, focus on what you're not so good at. Step into the uncomfortable, take a lesson, or learn from somebody that you might not interact with. And so through this, I'm thinking of a few people in my head that really can probably mentor me in some of the places that feel challenging to me, but are still so crucial. Because just because they're hard doesn't mean that I can't do them. And I think that's a really big reminder for me, and something that's been really important for me throughout this process.
And I got my quote.
Go ahead, John.
I got my quote, so I'm good.
Yeah, great point about mentors too, because just every leader needs mentors. I have what I call an informal board of directors, just people that I keep close that I go to for advice and guidance. One of them being my wife, but there are many others. And just say, am I on track or am I off track? Because
Totally.
being a leader, as you know, in prior experiences where you were, an HR team of one, that can be a lonely place if you don't have other people to bounce things off of, and someone who will call you on your what. Be like, nope, sorry, I'm not letting that go.
Yes, totally. HR is so isolating. It's really, really tough, even when you do have a team, right? And so how do you utilize your resources to make sure that you're on the right track, but also, gain strength and continue to drive things forward, because it's pretty lonely out here. I love it, but it can be a lonely road for sure.
Wonderful guest. Thrilled to have you. Thank you so much for the content and commentary today. Do you have someone in your network that you can think of that would be a great guest for the show, that would enjoy the OAD process, the readout, the study, this kind of a give and take communication, and would be willing to visit with us here, that is in a leadership capacity, and can analyze their traits under stress?
Yeah, the first person that came to mind, and gosh, I haven't spoken with her in a little while. I'm actually due to reach out. Her name is Susan Wall. I don't know if you're familiar. She was our CMO at Devada, and probably one of the first really, really strong female leadership role models. She's always supported me. She's great. She's very people first, but she's also very, very business. Let's get down to it, process. She's just, she's a bad bleep,
She is.
Yes, I like it.
She
Susan,
is. She's wonderful. So that's who I would suggest.
Susan, we will be contacting you. Actually, Sarah will be contacting you. By the time this airs, you will have already said yes or no, and we'll know each other.
That's right.
Will, who am I?
You're John Lane, Uber producer.
And who are you?
I'm Will Barfield, Arm Candy.
And who are we?
We are a work in progress.
Work in progress. Sarah, great show. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Work in Progress is a podcast presentation of Slipshod Productions. Available on LinkedIn and YouTube. Executive produced and starring John Lane and Will Barfield. Talent booking, production, and editing by John Lane. Thanks for watching. See you next week.